Well, hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar hosted by Switchee on cutting-edge data and retrofit validation. Thank you, first and foremost, for finding an hour in your calendar to join us for what I'm hoping will be a really enjoyable session. As the slide beside me says, my name is Rochelle Hadley, and I'm one of the customer success managers here at Switchee, and I will be hosting you for the next hour. I've worked at Switchee for about 2.5 years, and primarily I work with organisations in the Midlands and the north of the UK. Some general housekeeping. Just below the main screen, there should be a box that says ask a question, so please do ask away. We will try our best to cover all questions at the end of the webinar, but if not, we can also see who has asked each question, and we will follow up via email when the session has ended. With mention of follow-up, we will be providing a recording of the webinar likely later this week, meaning if you find today insightful, you can watch it again or you can send it to others in your team. You may have noted we've had a change in speakers from those originally announced. So unfortunately, Stoke Unitas were unable to join us today, but we will be doing a case study at a future date, and we will send that out to all who have registered for this event. So if you were particularly interested in that due to locality or the project specifically, you will still get that update once the case study has been completed. Today, we should be hearing from Mike Balfour from Southwark Council on their damp and mould work, and Helen Langley, who will be talking about case studies at Dudley Metropolitan Borough Council. We will then hear from Ian Hutton from Switchee about some exciting developments in our offering that were launched earlier this week. So for those of you who want or may need a bit of information on Switchee, we are a data and insights company, and we collect data through a smart thermostat. And then housing providers have access to their data through a portal that highlights the insights beside me. The customer success team, where I sit, work with organisations to use these insights and other data points that we collect to assist housing providers proactively manage their stock and give an awareness of the internal condition of their homes behind closed doors. Having a holistic view of property performance allows us to plan with intent how we can best improve a property for the benefit of not only the resident, but also the housing provider, as we are caring for homes, but they are also assets as well. It's quite common, especially transitioning from a reactive maintenance model, to focus on poor performing properties or those being identified as being at high risk and what we can do to reduce that risk. But the adverse is also true. Looking at the low-risk properties can give us an idea of which archetypes, heating systems, or interventions are performing best, thus allowing us to allocate funds more effectively going forward. Data helps us to set baselines, measure impact, and also act when something is wrong. This webinar is especially timely as we approach SHDF Wave 3 and other funding application periods, which all require forms of project validation. We all know that by doing X, the impact should be Y. And when it comes to evidence or evidencing impact, is that Y uppercase, lowercase, or have you actually achieved a different letter entirely? Without data, we cannot clearly measure the achieved impact or whether the impact has been materialized at all. There is a sharp difference in this intervention should reduce the risk of mold in this home to this intervention has reduced the risk of mold in this home. And then further, this intervention has reduced the risk of mold by, in the instance beside me, reduced that risk by 60%, which is demonstrated by that lime green line. I think we can all agree which statement would be most impactful. But these are more than just numbers for DLUC. Here at Switchee, especially in my team, we want to make sure that we are working with you to evidence the impact that you are having on your housing stock, allowing you to make data-led decisions effectively and efficiently regarding which should be repeated, revisited, or relegated to a pile of ineffective interventions. Now, I can sit here and I can talk about examples for quite a while, but as we've mentioned, we have two customers who will be showcasing their real-world examples of data in action. I'm going to check, but I think we're going to go to Helen Langley first, and then we will go to Mike Balfour. So if you bear with me, I'll pass over to Helen. Oh, I think Helen's on mute. There we go.
So for some reason, my mute button won't unmute. I've had to have help there, so bear with me. So hi everyone, thank you very much for having me. I manage Dudley Council's Energy Advice and Winter Warm Service. We're quite unique in Dudley that we have our own in-house energy advice service. And it's not only available to our own tenants, of which we have over 21,000 properties, but available to all residents of the borough across all tenures. And we've received probably over 5,000 inquiries last year. So every household has felt the impact of the energy crisis, with more and more being pushed into fuel poverty. As a landlord, we want to support our tenants to be able to afford to live in warm, comfortable homes, but how to identify these tenants most at risk is always a challenge. So we've been working with Switchee for a few years now and have over 1,700 installed in mainly our worst performing properties. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we use the real-time data from the Switchee dashboard to support our residents who are most at risk from the cold and most likely to be living in fuel poverty. And then I'll also talk about how we're going to use the data for validating some of the work and the retrofit measures that we've carried out. Next slide, please. So the added value. The data we obtained through Switchee enables us to be proactive rather than reactive, helping with maintenance planning. It also helps to defend our disrepair liability. The majority of disrepair claims we receive are mould related, and we can use the data to sometimes evidence that a property is underheated to help our defence. So we're able to identify properties with potential problems before it is even being reported, those that are likely to have problems with condensation, damp and mould, and also those households that are at risk of being in fuel poverty. We gain this information from the data showing those homes that are being underheated, or even occasionally we get them overheated. The digital communication tool is something that we find really useful and enables us to communicate direct with our residents. If we can help our tenants heat their homes more effectively, we can not only drive down their energy bills, but we'll have the added value of reducing visits to GPs, admissions to hospital, and delay the need for care. Next slide. So what do we look for? Oh, sorry, I think it's the slide before. What do we look for? The dashboard enables us to be proactive and identify residents most at risk from the cold and not heating their homes effectively. It helps us to identify those at risk from the effects of mould based on the humidity levels in the property, and even spot those that heat their homes to unnecessarily high temperatures. It's not unusual to see properties heated to 30 degrees. And then it also helps us to validate any measures we install, such as external wall insulation. We look to monitor the time it takes to heat the home and time it takes to cool down. And this information is so useful for the energy advisors and frontline workers to be able to get a picture of how a tenant is using their heating system before contact is even made with them. We can cross-reference this information with data that we already hold on residents, such as their age, their disabilities, the occupancy of the property. And this then enables us to give a personalised, tailored response to individual tenants to help them to afford to live comfortably in warmer homes. Next slide then, please. Okay, so this is a case study regarding, the next few slides really are case studies of examples of where data has helped us to provide a much better service. The Switchee data, we sent out messages that had highlighted those properties that were showing the risk of damp and mould, a high risk. This case was a 3-bedroom semi-detached house with a 1-year-old combi boiler, double glazed windows, loft and cavity wall insulation filled. Basically, not a property that would that without this data would have been under our radar. But the tenant came back from the survey saying that she reported mould in her bedroom. We checked the Switchee data and it showed that the property rarely heated above 16 degrees and there was a 76% risk of mould. So we carried out a survey and found that on the side of the house that had little sun during the day, the gutter was leaking. The property had no extractor fans and we weren't aware of this. We had assumed it had, and the tenant had blocked the air vents. So we carried out the repairs and we followed this up with some heating advice, ventilation advice, and how to use her heating controls, thermostat, TRVs, that type of thing. The mould risk following these actions reduced considerably down to 29%, exactly what we were hoping for. But we do try and monitor these interventions. And so a year later, we tend to go back and check and see what the position is. And with this case, we could see that the mould risk had increased again, but not to the same levels as previously. So it's just a case of a quick phone call to the resident, a gentle reminder of how to try and avoid mould, importance of heating and ventilating. But fortunately, she did report that she'd had no further signs of mould. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a case where a property, we carried out some repairs to the roof and repaired the extractor fans this time. And you can see the dashboard is showing a sharp drop in the risk of damp and mould in January, as soon as the repairs were completed. So before we had this data, we'd have had to have that follow-up with the resident, potentially carry out a home visit to ensure that any issues had been resolved. And in some cases, maybe even multiple visits to go back out to a property to ensure the problem hasn't returned. However, with the technology, we're able to check the data remotely and monitor how the house is performing. Okay, next slide then, please. So this is where we have done some straightforward case really of through land funding. We've retrofitted a home, fitted external wall insulation, and immediately you can see there's a sharp drop in levels of humidity. And well, this is what we like to see. We can see the measures fitted are actually working. Next slide. This is again another property where we have fitted external wall insulation through land funding. And this dashboard shows the data pre-measures. The average room temperature is 18.3 degrees, heating usage 16 hours per day, and temperature outside around 8 degrees. And now the next slide will show you post-measures. You can see the average room temperature is now over a degree warmer. Heating usage has been reduced by over an hour per day. And this is at a time when the outdoor temperature was actually 2 degrees colder. So this is actually part of a terraced block of bungalows where we have fitted external wall insulation. It was actually done at the very beginning of LAD, before the retrofit design changed. So we actually went below ground fitting this external wall insulation. So this block is what we really call our Rolls Royce of properties. So the properties have had real positive results in the other properties, apart from one of the block, which isn't performing as we hoped. But although this isn't what we want to hear, without the data, we totally wouldn't have been aware, and we'd just be assuming that, with the level of investment we put in, the property would be performing well. But it now gives us the opportunity to carry out further investigations. We don't know what the problem is. We plan to investigate further by carrying out thermal imaging. It may, of course, be something similar, like the resident prefers to leave a window open all day. That's certainly what we're hoping. But we've also had similar cases recently where we have properties which we had assumed were EPCCs, and we had no reason to be directing resources to them. However, data is showing that they're not performing as we hoped and have extremely high levels of humidity and are incredibly slow to heat up. So after surveys, not really being able to work out what it is, we decided to get some boroscope surveys carried out, and it's actually showing that a number of the properties' cavity insulation has failed. They've either been very patchy, probably never fitted very well in the first place, and in some cases the insulation is really quite sodden and wet. So we've been able to demonstrate this, and we've been able to extract, and then we're able to go on to use an SHDF funding to refill them. And so this data really provides us with the case we need to justify the works. Back to you then.
Thank you so much for going through those examples. It's one of those things where, as mentioned before, it's always great to get an understanding of these are the measures and these are the inputs that we're doing, but actually how do we measure that and how do we know that we're having that impact? So it's great to see that you can actually demonstrate that. What we will be doing next is we'll be going to Michael Balfour from Southwark Council. So bear with me, I'll just change with those slides.
Afternoon, folks. I assume everybody can hear me. I've not done a presentation. I'll just be going through some things that we've done in Southwark Council on the Kingswood housing estate, which features almost 700 properties. Basically, we were 4 years in the design on the project. We came up with various measures. The estate had inherent condensation, damp and mould issues for quite a long time, and the aim of the project was to actually come up with measures to alleviate that. What we actually done at one point was appointed the technical consultants, NDM Heath, to review all the proposals that we'd had during the course of the design stages. They then came back and done some surveys across some of the properties and came back with a solution that would remedy, that we hoped would remedy the ongoing CDM issues. And part of that was to install the Switchee devices alongside direct control mechanical extract ventilation systems, which are provided by Airco, and also to deal with and the damp issues within the properties, as well as the structural issues within the property as well, in terms of making sure that they're airtight and watertight and any other issues. What they actually came back with is 165 of the properties out of the 8 blocks were cavity wall blocks, and our intention was to put EWI across all the blocks across the estate, but NDM Heath came back and recommended that we installed EWI on just the cavity wall blocks, which there was 8 of, featuring 165 properties, and the remaining 400 plus properties on the pitch roof blocks were solid wall, and didn't recommend that we installed EWI on those properties. So originally it was an all-encompassing project, but given the advice from NDM Heath, we changed the whole process of the project. So we split it up into 3 projects, and that was to deal with the external issues on the properties on the pitch roof blocks first, then a separate project to follow on from that to deal with internal works, which involved the installation of the Switchee devices alongside the Airco systems, heating, and all other associated works as well. In terms of the flat roof blocks, we split that into a separate project, and that encompassed all of the works, and that was quite some detailed design. Helen mentioned earlier on some investigative works that they undertook in terms of bore scopes and surveys, heat surveys and thermal imaging surveys. We done all that already as part of the design process. There were inherent issues within the blocks, water retention within the blocks and stuff like that. So we obviously aimed to sort all that. What we did do though was we picked out some of the worst properties at the outset of the project to undertake pilot works to those. So we would have pre and post information in terms of what the data coming back from the Switchee devices was pre-works and then post-works. So we undertook a survey. It was last year. NDM Heath revisited alongside Switchee, done some surveys alongside that, and the actual results were quite positive that came back. So we were quite pleased with that, in that the work that we'd undertaken had actually alleviated the condensation, damp and mould issues within those properties. So we're quite pleased with that, because throughout the whole process and all the consultation meetings with all the affected residents and tenants and resident associations and so on and so forth, I never ever promised that it would solve the problem. It was just a case of, we hope that it will alleviate, and thankfully it did alleviate the problems. So that was a big plus for us. The only issue that the NDM Heath picked up was the fact that we'd failed to recognise that we had to actually treat the damp and mould existing in the properties, so we had to go back and sort of add that into the internals project. Thankfully we had enough money to do that. The project overall was around £68 million, across all 3 projects. Thankfully they've all came in under budget, and what we're doing now is we're almost at the tail end of wrapping up all the 3 projects. Basically we had a few issues with other works, not so much the Switchee works or the ventilation works, but other works involved in it relating to front end restores and that. So basically, the project has been a success, and also alongside the flat roof blocks, we're also applying for Eco4 funding for all the external wall insulation and roof insulation that we put onto those properties. So it has been a positive outcome. The only issue that we have had was on the pitched roof blocks. There's over 165 leaseholders involved in it, and unfortunately we were unable, we had to offer them that solution and they had to pay for it on the pitched roof blocks, and I think we only got one leaseholder take up on that. In terms of the flat roof blocks, the council made a decision to offer it free of charge to the leaseholders, 45 leaseholders, and soak up those costs, but the take up was quite small, so we're just finalising that now with the leaseholders. So there's been a few issues with that, but we're working through that now to finalise that and complete the project. So overall, it's been a success. There's been a lot of lessons learned from the outset. It's been technically challenging when it's came to the EWI in terms of the design processes and trying to make sure everything's done right and properly and aesthetically pleasing, and it has turned out really well. And I believe Switchee will be doing a case study on this Kingswood project, which should bring out some positive outcomes, you know, and basically the residents on this estate are coming back with some positive feedback. So yeah, we've improved the lives of the residents on the estate and their health and well-being as well. So it's been quite positive. In addition to that, the other things, I mean, in terms of my role is just to deliver the project. The final outcomes that we're going through now is to basically go on to train up the repair staff and the internal damp and mold team, which has already, some of that's already taken place, so they can take over the monitoring of the Switchee devices that have been installed in almost 400 properties. So yeah, it'll be ongoing, and it's quite important that they continue to monitor those properties and what they do moving forward, as any local authority will have to do, given the introduction of AWAB's law that's pending, basically, and how you monitor that and feedback on that. So Switchee's been quite positive in terms of that we can track the data and also flag risks, properties at risk during the course, you know, and feedback to them. So yeah, positive throughout. Challenging project, yes. Lessons learned, yes. The only downside is cost, the cost of the projects and the cost of those works involved. With the budgetary issues throughout local authorities at the moment and social housing landlords, I think that's the biggest challenge that they'll have when they come across these issues where you've got condensation, damp and mould. So I think it's just one of these things that all organisations will be facing. However, it is a positive solution. I think what we've done is the gold-plated version of how to deal with condensation, damp and mould. I know a lot of local authorities that are all doing works at the moment to alleviate condensation, damp and mould, but not on the same level as what we've done on this project, or like what Helen has also advised in terms of what they've done in Dudley. So that's all I've got to say. If you've got any questions, put them on the side. I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And yeah, as Mike has just mentioned, we will definitely be doing a case study with Southwark Council in the future on that work. So I think it's a great example of being able to sort of define what success looks like, being able to deliver that, and then being able to demonstrate that back and being able to measure that. Next, we have Ian Hutton from Switchee, so I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Rochelle, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Ian. I'm the Product Engineering Director at Switchee, which means I run the team that builds all of Switchee's technologies, so the thermostats, the data science, all the insights that come out of that. So we've heard really interesting case studies already today, great examples of the power of data. I'm going to dig into this a little bit more, exploring further ways that we can harness the power of real data for retrofit. I'm going to start by posing a question. So, can data help us achieve retrofit success? So, I think this question helps us get to the core of the topic. And to answer it, I think we first need to pose another question. There we go. Why are we retrofitting? So, and I propose here that there are three main drivers. So, resident well-being, maintaining asset value, and achieving net zero. Taking each of those in turn, firstly for resident well-being, the Fitness for Human Habitation Act and Awab's law mandate clear obligations. But beyond that regulatory and legal compliance, well-being is why the social housing sector exists at all. We're always retrofitting for our residents. And then in terms of maintaining asset value, homes are critical assets for housing providers. You have vast amounts of money tied up in them. You want to maintain them for the long haul so you can pass them from family to family, generation to generation. That requires regular planned retrofit. And then thirdly, in terms of net zero, so achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 is a big goal. It's big in terms of importance, both for residents and important for society's well-being overall. The aim here is to make sure that we've got a long-term habitable planet. As well as being big in importance, though, net zero is really big in terms of the scope of the challenge. So SHDF Wave 3 will deliver £1.25 billion of funding. Now, that's a vast number, one I can hardly comprehend. But that 1.25 billion is only a little over 1% of the £104 billion that Inside Housing estimated is required to get all UK social housing to net zero. Now, our housing stock will have to undergo huge improvements to get us where we need to be. And on all three of these points, resident well-being, maintaining asset value, and achieving net zero, what we care about here is real tangible success. Residents' lives actually improving, our carbon footprint reducing in reality and not just on paper. So I would say that data clearly has a critical role to play, letting us push past survey-based assessments to measure the impact in a real and concrete way. So here I've sort of reframed my question very slightly, because I think now hopefully we're confident that data can help us achieve success, and it's more a question of how it might do that. So in order to answer that, I think next I need to dig into a little bit of what success might look like. So a slightly more wordy slide, apologies for that. But here are some good questions I think we can ask to make sure that you're really putting your data to work for you. So firstly, in terms of success in resident well-being, are you actually making homes more healthy? So data can definitely help here, demonstrating positive impacts across warmer homes, across lower risk of damp and mold. And then you need to ask, is quality of life really increasing for your residents? SHDF Wave 3 guidance repeatedly emphasizes the importance of positive resident outcomes. So data will shine a light on any unintended consequences. So places where energy bills are going up rather than down, where risk of damp and mold might be increasing as you seal up a home. So data will give you confidence that you really are improving well-being. And it means that you won't need to leave anyone behind because you'll know about even isolated problems during any retrofit program. And lastly, on the resident wellbeing front, can you prove it? So data allows you to demonstrate the positive benefits you're delivering, both to current residents and to future residents, showing that you care, showing you can be trusted, and allowing you to build positive relationships with your residents. And that will ease all of your retrofit work. So secondly, in terms of maintaining asset value, so when you're spending thousands of pounds solving a mold issue, you want to know that that problem has really gone away and that it won't recur next winter, that your building fabric is safe. Data tells you that. And are you monitoring how the performance of each of your homes changes over time? Keeping an eye on factors like how quickly a home warms up once the heating comes on, so what we would call time to heat, can allow you to spot and address small issues before they get big. Data here lets you get proactive with targeted maintenance, making sure that your homes are in tip-top shape and you're using your money wisely. Then in terms of achieving net zero, ask yourself, are you actually reducing your carbon footprint? We have to hit net zero in reality, not just on the paper of EPC certificates. Without measurements, you won't know whether there's a performance gap between the design and the lived reality. And that's why impact measurement is encouraged so much in SHDF Wave 3. Lastly, around deploying capital. Now, the vast majority of your net zero spend is going to come from your core budgets. Even SHDF Wave 3 requires you to match the funding you receive. So spending wisely is critical. So ask yourself, are you confident that you're getting what you pay for? Data will give you and enable you to have a more mature and informed discussion with your suppliers. So are your contractors performing as expected and delivering what you pay for? And are they performing consistently across all the homes they're working on? Data also allows you to understand and learn from any deployment challenges you hit. Is ventilation being switched off by residents, or are heat pumps not being used as you envisaged? Detecting and learning those lessons early means that you can farm those learnings back into your ongoing deployment projects, making sure that your capital is deployed effectively. And also ask yourself, do you understand what works where? So different archetypes of home and different resident demographics may benefit most from different sets of interventions. Retrofit doesn't need to be one size fits all, and data can guide you here and inform your strategy, maximizing your impact overall. And lastly, in terms of return on investment, if what you care about, as we've talked about here, is real world impact, shouldn't you be measuring and reporting your returns based on that real impact, not assumptions? So hopefully I've made the case here that data can do a lot to drive effective retrofit. So how can Switchee contribute? So Switchee's IoT data and our powerful insights can help to answer all of these questions. Wherever you need real data to inform the discussion, we're there. And there's one particular part of our offering, as Rachel mentioned at the top, that had been launched earlier this week that's particularly relevant here. So I'm going to talk for a moment about smart meter insights. So Switchee's Smart Meter Insights provides detailed whole home energy usage data, and it uses that data to offer an accurate view of a property's thermal performance and how that performance changes over time. So what does that actually mean? So there are 6 key elements I'll focus on here to take you through the story. The first of those is consent management. So resident consent is a legal requirement for accessing smart meter data. Our consent solution leverages Switchee's communication capabilities, and it's been signed off by Ofcom, the energy regulator. It delivers huge savings versus other methods, removing manual processing and reducing complexity and friction. For example, there's no need for residents to find and report smart meter serial numbers. And as well as gaining consent, Switchee's solution manages it in a compliant manner on an ongoing basis as tenancies change and as time moves on. So with consent in place, we can start to automatically collect the data. So the energy data we collect is 30-minute usage for both gas and electricity. And we present that energy usage not just in kilowatt hours, but also in pounds spent by residents on their energy and in kilograms of CO2 equivalent. So you can bring it into conversations in whatever form is going to be most impactful for you. So having collected all that data, we then use it to paint a clear picture of thermal performance. And we do that via measured HTC. So apologies, another acronym. HTC is heat transfer coefficient. It's a measure of how well a building retains heat, and it's the number that underlies many of the calculations on an EPC certificate. Now, usually you have it estimated by a surveyor. Smart Meter Insights is the only cost-effective and scalable solution to get real measurements to let you bridge that gap between the design intent and the lived reality. And once we've collected all this data and processed it, we can use it then to compare performance versus expectation. So looking at retrofit validation, for example, you can take measurements before and after to prove that the interventions you're making are having the impact that you expect. You can use it for supplier performance, as we discussed earlier, to make sure that your suppliers are delivering value for money and to make sure that they're delivering that consistently across all of your homes. You can also use it to make sure that you're delivering the resident experience you want to, that energy bills are really going down, that temperatures in homes are comfortable and healthy, that mold risk is really lowering. And with Switchee's optional sensors, you can also monitor air quality and see that that's improving in the way that you expect. So Smart Meter Insights provides the real data here that proves the value of your retrofit. So stepping back and looking through a strategic lens at this, on point 5, you can assess and you can act on actual return on investment. So bring that real data into your strategic planning. You can include real figures in your ESG and impact reporting, both externally and to the board. You can unlock sources of green funding where proof of impact is a non-negotiable part of the business case. Okay, the last benefit here on my list, number 6, is not in the what, but it's more in the how. So like everything we do, Smart Meter Insights is wrapped up in a tailored support package from Switchee's customer success team. So that's the team of which Rochelle is a key part. So we work with you to understand your goals and to help you achieve them. We don't just provide technology and insight, so we provide you solutions. So if you're interested in finding out more about Smart Meter Insights or any of the other ways that Switchee can help you to use data to deliver successful retrofit, then please come and talk to us or ask us some questions now. Thank you. So I'll hand back to Rochelle now to take us through questions.
Thank you so much. I think on behalf of everyone that has attended the webinar, I can thank all of our speakers. So Helen Langley, Mike Balfour, and also Ian for their insights, not only in that real world example as to how data is being used, but also the importance of data on retrofit as well. So I think, thank you very much. I never really trust a webinar when they're like, lots of questions have been coming in, but they have. So I think we should just get started straight away. And we've got about 20 minutes for questions. So as I stated before, for anyone who joined a little later, you will receive a recording of the webinar for everyone that has signed up. And also, if we don't manage to cover your question in this time now, we can see who has sent in that question and your email address. So we will follow up if it's not answered directly in this session. Jumping in, let's have a look. So I think this one here is directly for Helen, to jump straight in. So you mentioned that you've installed 1,700 Switchee units in the worst performing properties. How did you ascertain which properties needed intervention first? And did you have any prior data or information on those properties?
Yeah, so it was part of a funding agreement, actually. So we could get ERDF funding to install replacement boilers. The requirement of that was that the properties needed to be in EPCE. So we've got EPC data on the vast majority of our stock, so it was quite an easy way of finding the properties, of going through those, and then doing them area based. So because the funding was targeted at that, and the funding required to have some innovative technology at that time when we were putting in a few years ago, and so that's why we decided first of all we chose Switchee and to put that in as part of our bid, in order for us to get that funding. So that's why they're all. So our data, when you look at our dashboard, our data looks very poor, and the data is showing that there's very high risk of fuel poverty and high risk of condensation, damp and mould on a very high percentage of them. But that's the reason for that, because the vast majority of them are our solid wall, lower rated homes.
Thanks, Helen. The next question I think would go to Ian. So from a technical standpoint, how accurate is data from a centrally located sensor to specific location related issues? Does Switchee only place one sensor per property?
So by default, most of our customers will just put one Switchee into the property and that'll collect data from a central location. We do support additional sensors though. So if a housing association has concerns about one particular room or a couple of areas in a home, they can put a Switchee into a central location to enable the resident to control the heating, but they can also put additional sensors in any rooms they particularly want to monitor. So that gives you the flexibility to attack either of those. We found certainly in homes up to around about 100 square meters that one set of sensors positioned centrally in the home will collect enough data for us to provide good and accurate fuel poverty, mold risk, etc. analysis for that home. But we do have the flexibility to support multi-sensor strategies for anybody who wants to go down that route.
Thank you. Let's have a look. So one of the questions is, apart from SHDF, what other government funding is available for retrofit projects and validation work? I guess that sort of comes down to me more. So SHDF is definitely a common one that we see and we are installed against. SHQF is another one. I know that ERDF was the funding that Helen at Dudley was using, which is no longer available, but Eco4 and LAD funding as well, some of the funding streams that we are currently available to be installed against. We've got a couple of property specific or sort of presentation specific questions. So let's have a look. There's one here for Helen with the graphs that you showed with the EWI ones. And there was a question that's asked, have the drops in relative humidity been checked against external humidity to remove the possibility of external factors?
No, basically. No, we have totally relied on the data. So you get with the Switchee, you do get the information regarding the temperatures outside. So you do get an indication of when, and obviously you know during the summer months, when you're looking in winter months, to expect that the differences. So you do take that into account. But we're looking at overall trends and overall trends over a long period of time to check that the measures we are installing are working.
Yeah, as the customer success manager that actually does work with Dudley, I can also say that on some of the project work, we did check against the external humidity, as it is one of the other data points that we collect along with the insights as well. So another one, I've got one here which asks, does Switchee communicate with DMEB systems and does it give an indication on overheating in dwellings? As Ian has sort of touched on, we do support additional sensors as long as they are Z-Wave enabled. I'm not currently aware of any mechanical extraction that is Z-Wave enabled, but the second part of the question as to do we offer an indication of overheating? Yes, one of our main insights is heat stroke risk. And with the organisations that I've been working with, especially over this summer and actually across our team, overheating has been definitely one of the metrics that organisations have been starting to focus on a lot more recently. So it's no longer just we've installed some devices to help us to monitor with regards to damper mold and fuel poverty. The convex of that and that heat stroke element is also definitely becoming a larger part of the conversation. Oh, there are more questions coming in. So some of these have been answered. Bear with me, apologies. So can Switchee work with third-party sensors? I think that one's been answered. So is Switchee seeing that there is a correlation between properties that have been retrofitted and a risk of mold? It's an interesting question. Is there anyone that fancies taking that? As much as I've started by saying that there are customers and everyone doesn't want to hear me speak, I guess I might be the best place to speak on that one. I think there have been interesting elements, and I think what we have seen is with retrofitted properties on occasion where a ventilation strategy hasn't been fully considered or where a lot of works are happening at the same time, on occasion we have seen an increase in damper mold. The issue, not the issue, but the side effect of that means that when it's a longer term project and that can be identified through data earlier, that we can then speak to that organisation, help them speak to their retrofit coordinators about having to pivot on that works, just to make sure that going forward that ventilation element is taken into consideration. And you'd much rather be able to pivot while the works are being done rather than completing all of the works, then notifying that there's an issue and then having to revisit everything at the same time. But that's where data comes in handy. questions are being submitted quicker than I am able to read, so bear with me, but we love them. That is not me saying to stop. Please do keep sending them in, because as I said, we will make sure that they are addressed at the end. So there's a question: are you putting a self-diagnostic for tenants to almost self-refer if they have issues with heating, damp or mold, so it almost encourages tenants to contact early? Helen, do you want to take that one? Because I know that your team sort of specifically does work with sort of tenancy sustainment.
Yeah, so we're really keen for our tenants to be notifying us before we find out. I think there's been too many times that we've come across in the past where tenants just don't inform us. And then the problem obviously gets worse and worse and costs more and more to deal with. So we do have several teams here. We have our tenancy participation team. We also have our energy advice team, and that's through the sort of social media channels that we set up. We really promote self-referrals to us. But in addition, we recognise that not everyone refers to us. Some people just don't like to be contacted, and that's when we have found Switchee to be really useful for us to be able to send messages through the messaging device, to be able to say, look, we recognise it looks like there's issues with your home, and what we're finding is that the response back from people using that is just so much higher than we're finding from other means of communication. So you're talking regularly, but more or less every time, a 90% response rate from people responding just by being able to click on the Switchee device, yes or no, and that's really, we found really useful in bringing out people and being made aware of issues which we wouldn't have found out otherwise.
Amazing. Thank you, Helen. I think the next question is probably for Mike, but also maybe Helen, but I think we'll go to Mike first, is how do you balance the need for thorough data collection with the urgency to roll out retrofit measures, especially when the targets for net zero carbon emissions are as they are? Mike, you able to take that one? Helen, have you got any thoughts?
Right, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I was speaking away to myself with my mic down. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's the joy of the internet.
So remind me what the question was again.
No, that's fine. How do you balance the need for thorough data collection with the urgency to roll out retrofit measures, especially with the targets for net zero carbon emissions?
Yeah, that's actually been dealt with by a different department, but I'm just on the delivery side in terms of major works, and this was an ongoing project that had been outstanding for a long time. So yeah, I think another department's dealing with that, but it's given the other priorities that the council has got, it's very difficult. There is strategies in place, but it's not really to deal with that. They've got an in-house team that deals with the CDM issues when they arise, and they're dealt with on an as and when they come in. But I do know that the last time I spoke to the head of that department, they had 1,700 cases of CDM backlogged, and we were slated by the Ombudsman as well. So yeah, it's difficult to say the least. There's a lot of challenges, but it's actually not within my team. I'm actually on the delivery side. And we've got no plans at the moment that deal with those sort of issues in terms of what we're delivering in terms of major works. The only thing that we are proactively dealing with is we're incorporating everything that we've done on Kingswood Estate, where we're aware of condensation, damp and mould issues on the estates that we're going to wait to start working on. We build that in to deal with it. So there's no long-term fix for it or strategy in place as far as Southwark Council are concerned. That's getting worked on in the background, but I've not got any actual information on that other than what I'm dealing with on the major work side.
No, but your insight is still valuable, so thank you.
Shall I add a bit to that on what we're doing?
Yeah. Please do.
So pretty much the same as Mike, is that in as much that balancing the two is challenging because of our finances. And at the moment, really the focus is all about condensation, damp and mould. And we've actually been doing less on our retrofit side. But what we are trialling in an area of Dudley, we are creating a net zero neighbourhood area. And from that, we're looking to try and produce try and come up with a financial model that can be replicated at scale, so we're not then becoming totally reliant and dependent on grant funding. And one of the opportunities we're looking at is to create a solar as a service. So we'll be bringing in a revenue stream for the council through by putting solar on, not just on our own social housing stock, but the potential to be able to also put it on owner-occupied properties and to be bringing in an income. And hopefully then that will bring us in a revenue stream that we can then roll out on future and be ring-fenced for retrofit projects as well as some key thing, hopefully.
That sounds like a great sort of project to be working on. I'm going to sort of bundle the next two questions in together and probably pass them to Ian. Do Switchee smart meters always have to be installed as part of a main heating system? Can they be used purely for monitoring purposes only rather than as a combined heating control? And air quality monitors, can they be installed standalone from the heating control?
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. So taking the first part of that, so does a Switchee always have to be a heating control? No, it does not. That is our more common install path, but we also support what we call Switchee Connect, where the Switchee display is installed into the property and it senses data, but it's not connected to the heating system, so it doesn't actually control the heating. So that can go in cases where there are legacy heating systems, for example, electric storage heaters that Switchee cannot control, or it can be a quick and easy route to get Switchees into homes ahead of a retrofit program to assess conditions before retrofit to get your pre and post retrofit data. And then in terms of the air quality sensors, so Switchee's air quality sensors are separately installed units, but they do connect wirelessly back to the Switchee display. So you would need a Switchee display in the property to collect the data from the air quality sensors, and indeed any other temperature and humidity sensors or any other energy sensors you've installed in the property. And it's the display unit that then collects all that data and sends it back to Switchee's servers. And hopefully that covers those two.
I think it covers them very adequately. Thank you, Ian. There's a question here around how do you monitor your dashboard? Does someone check the board every day or weekly? I was going to see if I could do two in one, but I don't think I can. I'm going to pass that one probably to Helen, because I'm not sure if Mike would have that side of the dashboard.
We'd love to be able to check it daily if we had the resources. It would be absolutely ideal, but we don't. So it is more around capacity, and we tend to have go through several sort of projects a year when we're looking, and we know we're targeting areas. So coming into the winter, we'll be looking to send sort of messages out. We'll be looking at the data at some point during the winter and looking for those likely to be in fuel poverty, doing a campaign on that. And then we'll be looking at those where there's high risks of humidity or risks of damp and mould and target those. But what we find it's useful for when we do check in more regularly is, and we do get a tenant call us up and are having issues, and then you will always look to see have they got a Switchee installed and be able to look at the data that way. So we use it to program and to plan, but then we'll look at it individually as we get inquiries come in.
Yeah, I think there has been a relatively recent development on the dashboard where you can set a notification. So there is an email that could be sent on a Monday that will tell you how many properties from a mould risk, fuel poverty and a heat stroke risk perspective are at a high risk, and how many have moved into that high risk category and how many have moved out. So rather than having to check it every day, you could also be prompted by that email alert as well. The next question is, how are we helping housing associations communicate with retrofit works to residents? Not to play table tennis and to bat it back to Helen, but I think I'm aware that you use the messaging functionality quite a lot. Do you want to speak to that element?
Yeah, we find the messaging tool really useful. We can be sending group messages out to residents, so we can if we've highlighted certain ones which we want to target for retrofit measures, we can be sending out messages, and you can do brief, short surveys, so you can get some feedback from residents on those, yes, no sort of answers, and that can inform us then which households we want to target. And like us, we can just send individual messages to individual tenants. Access is a huge problem that we have. It probably is one of the hardest things we find is access, particularly with retrofit, because the number of times you need to visit a home just to be able to carry out measures is numerous, and people get tired by all the amount of contact we have to make with them. But that's when the communication tool we find is really useful, because we can send a message to a tenant and tell them, we want to make an appointment, we'll be coming at this time. They can, yes, no, is it suitable, not suitable? And then we can send reminders and prompts, don't forget we're coming, like you would on your mobile phone. But actually we find it works, it's more effective on the Switchee than we find through any other means that we use.
Thank you, Helen. I'm going to see if we can squeeze one more in. I'm going to warn Mike that it's coming to him. So we understand the investment that is needed for local authorities and RPs to achieve decarbonisation at scale is vast, and this comes at a time when budgets are already stretched. Are you looking to work with collaboratively with any private sector for financial support or financing infrastructure?
At present, I'm not aware that Southwark are. They might well be looking at it on the heat pump side, on the heating side, possibly, but not. There's nothing in the pipeline, as far as I'm aware, in terms of dealing with the individual properties across the housing stock. Yeah, nothing at all at the moment to look with the private sector. I mean, we've got quite strict procurement rules, so unless it was sort of something that was done through a procurement strategy to specifically deal with CDM, then that's the only way that would sort of happen. But that's all it would be. I believe that we are working on some new procurement at the moment, and a portion of that will be on condensation damping mould specifically, because what we had to do on the Kingswood estate, it was all quite new. It was not something that wasn't really dealt with as part of our major works or original briefs. So it's probably something in the pipeline, but there is nothing in terms of financial support or financing the infrastructure for that work, other than what was mentioned earlier on in terms of the SHDF funding or the Eco4 funding, for example, which is what we're applying for in terms of the Kingswood estate. So yeah, it's possibly a work in progress on the new procurement that we're going through now.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. That is the end of the webinar. Apparently my timekeeping is as bad as I thought it was, and we are definitely at 3 o'clock right now. We've got a couple of events that are coming up, and we've got a Northern and we've got a Southern Summit. And I just want to say thank you very much for everyone for attending. Thank you much for Mike, Helen and Ian for all speaking. And thank you to everyone for submitting as many questions as you did. Just to reiterate again, you will all receive a recording of the webinar, and we'll also follow up with a bit of information on the next events we have coming. But thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.